My dad, the CEO, fired me for being too soft-spoken. During a staff meeting, he mocked, "We need leaders, not librarians." Everyone laughed. Minutes later, the federal agent slammed down a file and said, "She's the one who blew the whistle." Dad's eyes went wide. And that's how my father, the all-powerful CEO of a multi-billion-dollar tech firm, found out that the quiet disappointment of a daughter he publicly mocked was also the whistleblower who ended his career. I didn't expect revenge. I only wanted the truth out there. But it was poetic, I won't lie. I've never been loud. I was the child who liked reading over performing, the one who listened while others interrupted. Growing up in Silicon Valley, in a mansion that looked more like a tech lab than a home, that made me the odd one out in my own family. My dad, Ronald Delacroix, wasn't just a CEO. He was the company, ArcLight Dynamics, a name that rang out in every high-rise from San Jose to Singapore. He had built it from a garage startup in the early 90s to one of the most powerful cybersecurity firms in the country. I worked there. I wasn't handed a corner office or coddled into a VP role like some expected. I started small, junior analyst in the systems integrity department. I wanted to earn my place, and I did. Quietly. Diligently. The work spoke for itself, even if I didn't. I guess that bothered my father more than I realized. To him, volume equaled leadership. Confidence meant control. And if you didn't shout in a boardroom, you may as well have been invisible. And in many ways, I was. My parents divorced when I was 20. My mom, who never fully fit into the cutthroat world my dad created, moved back to Bozeman, Montana. I visited often. Her home smelled of tea, and the only tech in sight was a 10-year-old laptop. I always felt more like myself there. Back in San Jose, I worked long hours. I didn't want to be seen as the CEO's daughter. I stayed late, reviewed server activity logs by hand, and went home long after the execs had left. No one noticed. Not until I found something I wasn't supposed to. It started with a server anomaly. Data was being transferred from internal servers to encrypted destinations overseas. At first glance, it looked routine until it didn't. There were digital fingerprints, trails that didn't align with our protocols. What bothered me most was the accounts doing it, dormant admin profiles, some assigned to former employees. I flagged it. Brought it to my direct supervisor, Selena Huynh, who had been with the company almost as long as my father. She looked at the data, gave me a tight smile, and told me she'd escalate appropriately. But nothing changed. The logs grew more suspicious. More frequent. I pushed again, gently but persistently. That's when she gave me the line that still makes my skin crawl: "Some things are above your clearance. If you want a career here, don't make noise." So, I stopped talking. But I didn't stop digging. I copied the logs. Used a separate encrypted drive to store what I found. Weeks of irregularities. Dozens of gigabytes of unauthorized data movement. I didn't fully understand what I was looking at, but I knew it was wrong. When I finally submitted the evidence, anonymously, to the SEC, I wasn't looking for justice. I just didn't want to be complicit. I'd seen how fast the tech industry could bury people who stood in the way of profit. I wasn't brave. I was scared. Then came the staff meeting. It was a Wednesday. Late morning. The entire ArcLight executive team was there, which was rare. My dad loved these dramatic moments, theatrical announcements, culture resets, vision speeches. He stood at the front like he was on stage. Sharp suit. That same smug confidence he always wore like cologne. He started talking about leadership culture. About restructuring. About how the company needed to cut dead weight and push for innovation. Then he looked straight at me. "We've got good people. Smart people. But we're not a library. We don't need soft-spoken followers, we need bold leaders. Loud thinkers. People who move fast." People chuckled. "We're not hiring librarians. We're building an army." They laughed. I felt my face burn. I looked at my hands, refusing to let the humiliation show. But inside, something cracked. Then came the sound I'll never forget, the sharp click of heels, followed by the heavy slam of a thick folder on the meeting table. Agent Marquez didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Mr. Delacroix? I'm with the SEC. We've obtained credible evidence of offshore data manipulation and fraudulent audit activity tied to ArcLight's federal contracts. We'll need you to come with us for questioning. The laughter died. I could feel the tension shift like someone had flipped the air conditioning on full blast. My dad stared at her. Then at the folder. Then, at me. She glanced my way and nodded. She's the one who submitted the report. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. The next few days blurred. The investigation swept through ArcLight like wildfire. Internal audits, seized laptops, suspensions. Selena resigned within 48 hours. A dozen people lawyered up. My dad went silent, retained a team of attorneys so fast it made national headlines. He didn't speak to me. Not once. I didn't return to the office. I cleared out my things late at night when no one was around. My apartment filled with silence. No calls from the company. No texts from colleagues. My inbox was empty, save for a short HR notice telling me my contract was under review pending investigation outcomes. And then, weeks later, I got a letter. Handwritten. From him. It was short. 5 sentences. Said he never expected his own daughter to turn on him. Said I was always too soft for the business world. Said I should have come to him first. Said he didn't raise a snitch. I didn't respond. Instead, I packed a bag and flew to Bozeman. My mom met me at the gate. She didn't say much. Just hugged me for a long time. That night, we sat on her porch drinking tea, watching snow fall, not needing to talk. For the first time in months, I could breathe. And the story isn't over yet. The media coverage was relentless. ArcLight was a hot topic on every business podcast, on CNBC, even late-night shows. The empire cracked from the inside, one journalist put it. There were whispers of government contracts being pulled, pending lawsuits from clients whose data had been mishandled. And quietly, behind all the headlines, was the fact that it was me, the mouse in the lion's den, who had pulled the first thread. My name didn't go public. The SEC protected whistleblower identities in most cases, especially where retaliation was a risk. But inside ArcLight, it wasn't a secret. The people who had worked with me knew. I could tell by the way the silence from my coworkers grew more purposeful, like they were scared guilt might rub off on them if they reached out. One person did try. Jordan Velez, an engineer I used to share coffee breaks with. He sent a single message, "I'm sorry. I should have said something when I saw what they did in that meeting. You didn't deserve that." I appreciated it. I didn't answer. My dad, on the other hand, tried again in his own twisted way. Another letter came a week later. Not handwritten this time. Typed. Precise. It looked more like a business memo than an apology. "You've permanently damaged the legacy of something I built from nothing. Do you understand that? Whatever your reasons, you'll live with what you did, just like I will." Legacy. That's what it always came down to with him. Not truth. Not ethics. Not people. Just legacy. I reread the letter once. Then I burned it. In Bozeman, the snow thickened. My mom's cabin was small and tucked between pine trees on the edge of Flathead National Forest. The days were quiet and honest. We cooked meals. I helped her shovel snow off the roof. We rewatched old movies. And bit by bit, I started sleeping through the night again. The SEC reached out to me a few weeks later. I took the call from my mom's front porch, bundled in 2 sweaters and a blanket. The agent thanked me again. Told me the case had expanded. That they had probable cause for federal fraud charges. My dad might not be arrested, corporate investigations like this rarely led to orange jumpsuits, but he would be ruined. At least professionally. They also offered me something unexpected, a consulting position. Government agencies didn't often recruit from the private sector in these cases, but they needed someone who understood how a company like ArcLight operated, from the inside. Someone who could speak the language, spot the holes others couldn't. It would mean moving to D.C., testifying at hearings, possibly sitting in rooms with people who had once laughed at me. It would mean stepping out of the quiet and into the light. I didn't say yes right away. I sat with it. Talked it over with Mom, who didn't try to sway me one way or the other. She knew better than to tell me what I should or shouldn't do. I thought back to that meeting room, how small I felt when my dad made me the punchline in front of 200 people. How badly I'd wanted to crawl out of my own skin. But more than that, I remembered the moment the federal agent dropped that file on the table. The sound of truth landing like a hammer. And I remembered his eyes when he realized it had been me all along. I didn't want revenge. But I did want to rebuild. For myself. So I called the SEC back. I'm in, I told them. That decision started a whole new chapter one wasn't ready for, but I said yes anyway. I flew to D.C. the following week. It felt surreal, boarding that plane with a carry-on, a laptop, and a quiet certainty that my life had shifted entirely. A month ago, I was a background figure in a massive tech empire. Now, I was stepping into a role where I was expected to advise on the very thing that had destroyed my father's career. The consulting office they assigned me wasn't fancy. It was tucked into a dull gray building near L'Enfant Plaza, no glass walls or sleek design, just rows of cubicles and the low hum of bureaucracy. But for the first time, I felt respected. Not for my name or my last name, but for what I knew. Agent Marquez was different here, calmer, more focused, still sharp. She didn't treat me like a prodigy or a fragile insider. She treated me like a colleague. We've got 2 more companies with similar flags, she told me during one of our first briefings. The breadcrumbs are subtle. Most analysts wouldn't catch them. But you did. I didn't know how to respond. Compliments made me uncomfortable. I nodded and pulled up the files. The work was demanding, but it felt purposeful. I reviewed audits, data transfers, shell company registrations, and internal communications, finding patterns others had missed. A large part of the job was reading between the lines, learning the language of corporate misdirection. I knew it well. I had lived it. Every so often, I would see a name I recognized, someone from ArcLight. A vendor. A consulting partner. A secondary firm buried in an old acquisition deal. It reminded me how connected everything was. These weren't just isolated cases. This was a network, a system. My father had just been one node in a very large map. He, however, wasn't done with me. About a month after I arrived in D.C., I received a call from a blocked number. I didn't answer. Then an email, short, formal, cold. There's more at stake than you understand. The company, your family, our name. Stop before you destroy what's left. I stared at the screen for a long time. It wasn't signed, but I knew his tone. That clipped, self-righteous cadence. Always making everything about the brand, about control. Not once did he ask how I was doing. I didn't reply. Instead, I forwarded the message to Marquez. She didn't say much when she read it, just gave a single nod and flagged it for record. You're not alone in this, she said simply. Still, I couldn't shake the pit in my stomach. As much as I hated to admit it, his words still affected me. There was a small, stubborn part of me that still wanted his approval, his acknowledgement. Not as an employee. As his daughter. But he'd made his choice. So I made mine. I poured myself into the work. The long hours kept my mind busy. I took long walks on the National Mall after dark, when the monuments were lit up and the tourists thinned out. I found a bookstore in DuPont Circle and started spending my Saturdays there. I didn't make friends quickly, I never had, but I began to feel human again. Less like a ghost. One afternoon, I got a call from my mom. She didn't ask about the investigation. She never pried. She just wanted to hear my voice. I told her I was okay. That things were hard, but meaningful. She paused, then said, "That sounds like the right kind of hard." It stuck with me. A few days later, I was reviewing a case involving a defense tech supplier. Same patterns. Same misdirection. But buried deep in one of the contracts was a familiar shell company, Deltec Procurement Solutions. A subsidiary of ArcLight I hadn't thought about in years. One of the many side firms created to manage overflow accounts. Except this one had been used as a backchannel for data brokerage, sold to a third-party broker and funneled to foreign defense contractors. The kicker? My father's name was still on the incorporation records. He hadn't even bothered to hide it well. This time, I didn't hesitate. I compiled everything. Built the timeline. Documented the overlaps. When I handed the file to Marquez, she looked at it for a long time. Then she looked at me. "You know what this means, right?" I nodded. "He's not just going to lose his company," I said. "He could face real charges now." She didn't say it, but we both knew, this wasn't just an ethics violation or a misstep. This was national security fraud. And it was traceable. The moment sat heavy between us. I knew what came next. I knew the walls were closing in, for him. And still, some part of me didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired. Like I had walked 1,000 miles just to deliver a truth that should have been obvious from the start. But I wasn't done. Not yet. In the days that followed, things moved fast. Once the new report was filed, a second round of subpoenas went out, this time directly naming Deltec Procurement Solutions and several former ArcLight executives, including my father. The ripple effect started immediately. News broke before the ink was dry. Every major outlet picked it up, Delacroix under scrutiny for defense contract fraud, ArcLight subsidiary linked to international data leaks, whistleblower case expands as federal probe deepens. The speculation about who the whistleblower was began to resurface, though my identity was still protected. But I could feel the pressure again, like I was walking around with a target on my back. Colleagues at the agency became more protective. I started getting escorted to and from briefings. Even inside the walls of a government office, they were careful with protocol now. Meanwhile, back in California, my father went on a full PR offensive. He gave a pre-recorded interview to a friendly journalist at a major financial network, polished, calculated, vague. He claimed the investigation was politically motivated, blamed disgruntled insiders, and called the situation deeply personal. He never mentioned my name. He didn't need to. But I watched that clip, sitting on the floor of my DC apartment with the laptop balanced on my knees. And I realized something I hadn't fully accepted until that moment. My father would never see me as anything but a problem to control. Not a daughter. Not even a person. Just an obstacle. I felt the burn behind my eyes, but I didn't cry. I just shut the laptop and sat still, listening to the silence that followed. Outside, traffic hummed down Constitution Avenue. In here, it felt like the whole world had paused. The next morning, Agent Marquez asked me to come in early. There was something she wanted to show me before the rest of the team arrived. She slid a manila folder across the desk. I opened it, expecting more documentation, wire transfers, correspondence, internal emails. But what I saw made me stop cold. It was a legal memo. My father's attorneys had filed a preliminary injunction in federal court, alleging that I had misappropriated sensitive corporate data in a manner that jeopardized shareholder value and national defense confidentiality. They weren't going after the investigation directly, they were trying to discredit me as a witness. Not through facts. Through legal exhaustion. "He's trying to shut me up," I said, barely above a whisper. Marquez leaned back in her chair, her tone calm. That's how these cases go. First they deny. Then they distract. Then they destroy. I sat there for a moment, the words sinking in like cold water. Will it work? She shook her head. Not if we do our jobs. And not if you stay the course. I nodded. But inside, I felt something shift. A heaviness. A clarity. I knew now that this would not be clean. It would not be over quickly. And it would likely never give me the closure I once thought I wanted. Still, I didn't back down. The legal team responded to the injunction with a countersuit, citing whistleblower protection laws and documentation of internal wrongdoing. My testimony was scheduled for deposition in 2 weeks. I spent nearly every day preparing for it. Timelines. Documentation. Cross-referencing. Memorizing the details of every file I had submitted. But at night, I couldn't sleep. I started waking up in cold sweats, my mind running through every meeting, every server log, every moment I'd second-guessed myself over the last year. I worried they'd find a way to twist it. That somehow, I'd be the one held responsible. That I'd become the villain in the story I'd tried to make right. It was around then that my mother called again. She could hear it in my voice before I even said anything. You're unraveling, she said softly. You can't carry this alone. I'm fine, I told her. But I wasn't. You've already done what most people wouldn't, she said. That doesn't mean you have to lose yourself in the process. She asked me to come home for a weekend. Just 2 days. To rest. Think. Remember, I was a human being, not a case file. I hesitated. I thought about the deposition coming up, the nonstop work, the investigation pressing closer. And then I booked a flight. Back in Bozeman, the world was still. The snow had mostly melted, replaced by chilly winds and the first signs of spring. My mom made soup. We sat on the back porch again, wrapped in blankets, drinking tea. It felt so far removed from everything, no headlines, no suits, no servers. Just quiet. I'm proud of you, she said one night. Not because you exposed him. But because you stayed you. I didn't respond. I just nodded. When I flew back to DC, I felt a little stronger. The same weight was there, but it wasn't crushing me anymore. I had perspective. And maybe, a little peace. Still, as the deposition day approached, I could feel my father's shadow growing longer. His lawyers were powerful, trained to dismantle stories like mine piece by piece. I knew they'd try to make me look emotional. Disloyal. Manipulative. Naive. But I also knew the truth. And I knew what I saw on those servers. What I reported. What I lived. So I stood tall when I walked into the federal building, a stack of evidence in my hands, my voice steady, even if my heart wasn't. And as the doors closed behind me, I knew something else too. This wasn't the end. But it was the beginning of something he could never take from me. The deposition room was colder than I expected. Sterile. Quiet, except for the faint hum of the old ceiling fan. There were 3 attorneys on my father's side, 2 from the SEC, 1 recorder, and Agent Marquez seated beside me. No jury. No gavel. Just sworn statements and the weight of what came next. They tried everything. They questioned my competence, suggesting I had misunderstood routine security operations. They insinuated my actions were emotionally motivated because of my father's treatment of me. One even floated the idea that I'd fabricated the evidence out of some unresolved family trauma. I answered every question, calmly, directly. I didn't defend myself. I explained the data. I showed timelines. I described the chain of custody. I stayed anchored in facts. In the truth. They pushed harder when they saw I wouldn't rattle. And then they went too far. One of the attorneys leaned in, adjusted his tie, and said, "Do you feel your behavior towards your father was vengeful? Given your strained relationship? Do Do you believe, maybe subconsciously, that you wanted to hurt him? It was quiet for a beat. Then I smiled, just slightly, and said, no. I wanted to stop him. There's a difference. Even the stenographer paused for half a second before typing that. Marquez didn't say a word. She just glanced at me, then at the other side, and jotted something down in her notes with the kind of poise that said you just lost the room. The deposition ended 2 hours later. And that was the last time I had to sit across from anyone defending my father's actions. Over the following months, the investigation wrapped up. ArcLight Dynamics was hit with a $480 million fine. The government terminated all federal contracts. Multiple executives, including Selena, entered plea deals to avoid prison, admitting to willful negligence and compliance fraud. But my father? He fought it tooth and nail. Refused to settle. Refused to admit fault. Refused to even step down from the board, until the shareholders voted to remove him in a private, humiliating ouster that leaked to the press the next morning. His empire crumbled not with an explosion, but with a series of precise, public unravelings. First, the speaking engagements were cancelled. Then the stock dropped 68% in a single quarter. Then came the SEC sanctions, barring him from serving on any corporate board for 10 years. And finally, the crown jewel, his alma mater revoked his honorary doctorate and removed his name from their innovation center, the same one where he had once given a speech about visionary leadership. It was everywhere. Headlines. Blogs. Newsletters. No matter how well funded his crisis team was, they couldn't scrub the internet clean. The irony? The one person who never issued a single public statement was me. I didn't need to. One afternoon, about 6 months later, I was sitting at a little cafe in Adams Morgan. The sky was soft with late spring clouds, and for once, I was just still. I had taken a leave from my consulting role, short, just a few weeks. Enough to breathe. That's when the server brought over an envelope. No return address, she said, setting it gently beside my tea. But the guy said it was urgent. I opened it cautiously. Inside was a short letter, handwritten again. But this time it was different. You won. I don't know if that makes you happy. But you should know this, every room I walk into now, I wonder who knows. I wonder who sees me for what I really am. You didn't just ruin my legacy. You redefined it. And that's something I can't undo. I don't expect forgiveness. But I hope someday you'll believe I did, once, love you the only way I knew how. Ronald, I folded the letter back up. Thought about it. Let it sit on the table. Then I slipped it into the inside pocket of my coat, stood up, and walked away. I never responded. A year later, I was offered a full-time role in a federal oversight committee for tech ethics. A quiet but powerful position. My work would never be flashy or public, but it would shape policy. Protect people. Stop the next ArcLight before it ever started. I accepted. My mom visited D.C. that spring. We sat together on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial as the cherry blossoms bloomed. She looked at me with this soft, proud expression and said, "I think you found your voice." I smiled. Not loud, but certain. And, finally, it was enough.